They say kindness is the only wealth that grows the more you give it away. In a quiet town in Nebraska, an old man with weathered hands spent decades fixing children's bicycles, never asking for payment, only offering a smile. No one knew that one simple act, repairing a little boy's red bike, would ripple across time and shape the destiny of a nation. This isn't just a story about bicycles. It's about compassion, dignity, and how a humble man's quiet service touched the heart of a future president. Stay with me, and let's uncover the incredible journey of Walter Reed. If this story moves you, don't forget to follow, like, and share your thoughts, because sometimes our one story can change the way we see the world. The oak tree in the backyard of the old First Methodist Church had been standing for more than a century. Its roots were as deep in the Nebraska soil as Walter Reed's quiet routine was in the life of Harlan's Mill. Every morning at precisely 8 o'clock, the old man appeared, thin and deliberate in his movements, with the same battered fishing tackle box that held his carefully organized tools. His workbench was nothing more than a slab of plywood balanced on two sawhorses, but in Walter's hands it became a place of quiet miracles. For 30 years, children came pedaling or pushing their broken bicycles into the churchyard. Some had flat tires, some had tangled chains, others wobbled with twisted handlebars. No matter the condition, Walter would lift the bike gently, study it with the precision of a surgeon, and begin working. His sign was simple, hand-painted years ago, the paint now faded but still legible. Free bicycle repairs. If you need help, I'm here. He never took money, though sometimes children's mothers slipped cookies or pies into his hands, and he always accepted them with the same quiet gratitude. When asked why he offered his service for nothing, his answer was always the same. Everybody needs a working bicycle, not everybody has money. Walter himself lived simply, in a small room behind the vacant church. The congregation had moved across town to a new modern building 5 years earlier, but Walter had remained, a solitary figure among dust, peeling paint, and silence. To the children, he wasn't just a repairman. He was a dependable presence, someone who understood their small tragedies and restored their joy with a steady hand and an oil-stained rag. But to the town council, Walter was an obstacle. Harlan's Mill had recently received a federal community development grant, and the old church property was suddenly seen as valuable. At a council meeting, Marcus Dean, the newly elected head of town planning, announced his vision with practiced enthusiasm. We could transform that eyesore into something useful. A modern community center would serve everyone, not just a handful of people getting their bikes fixed by some eccentric old man. The vote to repurpose the church grounds was unanimous. On Monday morning, Marcus Dean arrived at the churchyard with 2 public works employees in tow. Walter was crouched over a little girl's purple bicycle, adjusting the handlebars with his usual patience. Dean wasted no time on politeness. "Mr. Reed, the town has approved redevelopment of this property. Your bicycle hobby is creating liability issues. That sign needs to come down today, and your equipment must be removed by Friday." Walter looked up, squinting into the sunlight. Around him, a half-dozen children stood watching nervously, their small hands resting on their bicycle seats. Dean's voice lowered, but not so low that Walter couldn't hear. "These senile old men, living off others' goodwill, they need to make way for progress. He's becoming an eyesore himself." Walter said nothing. Walter said, he finished aligning the handlebars, tested them, and handed the purple bicycle back to its owner. The girl's smile was wide, her gratitude wordless, but unmistakable. Then, with the same calmness that had defined his life, Walter began gathering his tools. By the afternoon, word had spread across town. Parents called the town office, but were told the decision was final. The children, however, were unwilling to accept it so quietly. 10 of them gathered on the church lawn with handmade signs that read, "Save Mr. Walter's Bike Shop." They waved at passing cars, and though a few sympathetic drivers honked their horns, the small protest faded quickly into the background noise of everyday life. Walter himself offered no resistance. He simply moved his workbench closer to the church wall, positioning it under the shade of the great oak tree where it would be less visible from the street. His sign no longer stood on its wooden post. It leaned instead against the rough bark of the tree. Still, he was there the next morning at 8 o'clock sharp, his tools lined up, ready to repair whatever broken bicycle a child wheeled toward him. To some in Harlan's Mill, Walter Reed was just an eccentric relic, clinging to the past. To the children who knew him, he was something entirely different. A quiet guardian who never asked questions, never demanded payment, and never failed to send them home with wheels spinning straight again. What no one knew, not even Walter himself, was that soon the sound of his tools clicking under the oak tree would be drowned out by something unimaginable. The roar of jet engines that had no place in a sleepy Midwestern town. The morning sun filtered through the oak leaves as Walter sat hunched over a small red bicycle, his gnarled fingers working the brake line with careful precision. To anyone passing by, it was an ordinary scene. The old man repairing another child's bike beneath the tree that had become his shelter. But on this day, something extraordinary was about to shatter the calm. At first, it was just a low vibration in the air, a rumble that seemed out of place in the quiet Nebraska town. Walter paused, the wrench still in his hand, and lifted his head. The sound grew louder, deeper, until even the children waiting nearby stopped their chatter and stared at the sky. Then the unmistakable thunder of massive engines rolled overhead. The residents of Harlan's Mill spilled out of shops and houses, shading their eyes against the glare. Gasps echoed as a colossal jet descended, its wings casting shadows across the town. Air Force One, sleek, white, and impossibly out of place, was preparing to land at the disused airstrip on the edge of town. No one in Harlan's Mill had ever seen anything like it. Within minutes, a convoy of black SUVs roared down Main Street, their tinted windows reflecting sunlight, their license plates marked with federal insignia. They moved quickly, deliberately, stopping in front of the old churchyard. The children clutching their bicycles stepped back, wide-eyed, as men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles. Their movements were sharp, purposeful, scanning the area with eyes trained for threats. Walter remained seated on his stool, wiping his hands on a rag already dark with years of grease. He had lived through enough to know when something important was unfolding, but his expression was as calm as ever. One man, dressed in a distinctive navy blue suit, broke from the group and approached. He carried himself with authority, his eyes steady, his voice controlled. "Sir, we're looking for Walter Reed," he said. "Would that be you?" Walter nodded slowly, resting the wrench on the plywood workbench. "That's me." The man extended a hand. "James Harper, National Security Advisor to the President." His tone softened slightly. "We've come to ask about a bicycle. A red one. Summer of 1985. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd that had gathered at a cautious distance. Townsfolk whispered guesses. Tax trouble, security breach, some hidden past. Marcus Dean pushed forward, puffing out his chest as if his position in town planning gave him authority here. "I'm the head of development," he announced loudly. "What's the meaning of this?" Harper barely glanced at him. His attention remained on Walter. "This bicycle," he continued, "belonged to a 9-year-old boy. The chain had snapped, the gears jammed, and the handlebar bent from a fall. You replaced the chain, repaired the gears, aligned the handlebars, and even added reflectors. You also fitted a bell, shaped like a rocket ship." For a moment, Walter's eyes clouded as he searched through decades of memories, thousands of repairs. Then a faint recognition flickered across his face. "Red bike with white stripes on the fenders," he said slowly. "Rocket ship bell. Yes, I remember." Harper nodded once sharply as though confirming a long-held piece of intelligence. "That boy never forgot you. He grew up, carried that memory, and today he is the President of the United States." The air seemed to freeze. Gasps rippled through the townspeople. Even Marcus Dean's smug confidence dissolved, his face paling. Children clutched their bicycles tighter as though sensing something monumental had just been revealed. Walter simply blinked, his expression steady, though the furrow between his brows deepened. Harper's words landed with the weight of destiny. President Michael Grant was that 9-year-old boy. He never forgot the man who fixed his bicycle when his mother could not afford to pay. In the distance, the sound of sirens and engines returned, this time from the presidential motorcade itself. The line of gleaming vehicles approached steadily, flanked by security teams and watched by an entire town now gathered in awe. Secret Service agents moved with precision, forming a perimeter around the churchyard as the lead limousine slowed to a stop. Every eye in Harlan's Mill was fixed on the moment. The car door opened, and from it stepped the President of the United States, tall, confident, yet carrying an expression not of formality, but of deep personal purpose. His presence was enough to silence the crowd entirely. Children's mouths hung open, parents whispered prayers, and Marcus Dean shrank back, realizing that his earlier insults toward Walter Reed had been witnessed by far more than just townsfolk. Walter remained seated beneath the oak tree, the rag still clutched loosely in his hand. He had spent a lifetime in quiet service, never expecting recognition. Now, under the weight of 1,000 stares, in the shadow of power itself, the old bicycle repairman waited for the most unlikely reunion of his life. The crowd pressed closer as the president stepped away from his limousine, his tall frame catching the sunlight. Cameras clicked furiously, news crews jostled for position, and yet, in that moment, there was no sense of ceremony in his stride. President Michael Grant walked with purpose, not as a politician addressing a rally, but as a man seeking someone from his past. His eyes found Walter beneath the oak tree. The old man had stood now, straighter than he had in years, his grease-stained rag tucked into his pocket. The two men approached each other slowly, a silence stretching over the churchyard until it seemed the entire town held its breath. "Mr. Reed," the president said, his voice steady but carrying a note of warmth. He extended his hand, a gesture both formal and deeply personal. "You probably don't remember me, but I've never forgotten you." Walter studied the face before him, older now, lined with responsibility, but still with traces of the boy who once pushed a broken red bicycle into his hands. Slowly, deliberately, Walter reached out and clasped the president's hand. His grip was firm, his voice calm. "Mr. President, your bike had playing cards clipped to the spokes, made it sound like a motorcycle." For a moment, the mask of authority fell away. President Grant's face broke into a pure, almost boyish smile. "You do remember?" A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, people wiping at their eyes as they realized the depth of this unlikely connection. The president turned slightly, addressing not just Walter, but everyone gathered. His voice rose, carrying across the churchyard. "When I was 9 years old, my bicycle broke. The chain snapped, the gears jammed, the handlebars bent. I was devastated. That bike was everything to me, my freedom, my joy, the only thing I truly owned. I walked it for 3 miles, crying, because I knew my mother couldn't afford repairs. And then," he gestured toward Walter, "I met this man." The crowd leaned in, captivated. Even the Secret Service agents, usually expressionless, softened as the president spoke. "He didn't ask me why I was alone or whether I could pay. He just said, 'Let me see what I can do.' And he fixed it. More than that, he gave me back my freedom. My mother tried to pay him, though it was grocery money she couldn't spare. He refused to take it." From his suit pocket, the president pulled a laminated photograph and handed it to Walter. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he accepted it. The image showed a skinny boy beaming beside a shiny red bicycle, with Walter, much younger, his hair still dark, standing behind him, a hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Beside them was a tired-looking woman, the boy's mother, her gratitude etched into her face. "She kept this photo until the day she died," the president said softly. On the back, she wrote, "The only one who helped without asking why." Walter stared at the photograph, his voice low but steady. "I remember now. She tried to give me $5. I could see it was her last." President Grant nodded. "She told me later she would have gone hungry to keep my bike working. But you wouldn't take it." The old man's eyes flickered with memory. Nobody should have to choose between eating and keeping their kid's bike running. The president turned back to the crowd, his voice rising again. "That lesson has stayed with me my entire life, that the poor deserve help without interrogation. That dignity costs nothing but means everything. That true service asks nothing in return. I carried that lesson into my public service, my policies, my belief in what this country can be." Then, with a solemnity that hushed even the television crews, he placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "You didn't just fix my bike, Mr. Reed. You helped fix the direction of my life. The words struck the town like a bell ringing across decades. Parents clutched their children, old men wiped tears, and even Marcus Dean, who had sneered at Walter days earlier, stood frozen, the weight of his arrogance exposed. Walter shifted uncomfortably, never a man for praise. "Just did what needed doing, sir," he muttered. "That," the president replied with a smile, "is precisely the point." The oak tree cast its shade over them both, one the most powerful man in the world, the other a humble repairman. Yet in that moment they stood as equals, bound by a simple act of kindness that had crossed the gulf of years and shaped a nation's leader. The silence broke as the crowd erupted in applause, cheers mixing with tears. For Harlan's Mill, for Walter, for every forgotten act of goodness that deserved to be remembered, this was more than a reunion. It was a revelation. And for Walter Reed, who had spent a lifetime in quiet service, it was the beginning of a recognition he had never sought, but had long since earned. The applause still echoed through the churchyard when President Grant lifted his hand, signaling for quiet. His gaze swept across the crowd, then back toward the weathered walls of the old Methodist church. "I understand," he said, his voice measured but resolute, "that there are plans to demolish this place." The words cut through the air like a blade. All eyes turned to Marcus Dean, who swallowed hard but stepped forward. "Yes, sir, the town council has approved the redevelopment. We've secured federal funding for a modern community center. The plans are finalized." President Grant nodded thoughtfully, his expression unreadable. "And what consideration was given to Mr. Reed's repair shop?" Marcus hesitated. "We determined it was an unauthorized use of municipal property. Liability issues, sir." A murmur of disapproval rolled through the townspeople. The president's eyes narrowed slightly, the steel in his tone unmistakable. "Here's what I see, Mr. Dean. I see a man who has served this community selflessly for decades. I see a place where children come for help, where kindness is given freely. That is not a liability. That is the very definition of community." He turned to his staff. "Restructure the development grant. This church will not be demolished. It will be restored. Half of it will house a proper weather-protected workshop for Mr. Reed. The other half can serve as your community center." The reaction was immediate. Cheers erupted, children jumping up and down, parents clapping, elderly residents nodding with approval. Years of quiet gratitude finally found a voice. But the transformation was only beginning. As the cheers died down, people began stepping forward, one by one, with stories of Walter's unseen generosity. "He fixed my daughter's bike last Christmas," a woman called out. "We couldn't afford a new one, and he even found a basket to make it special." An older man shuffled forward, his voice shaking. "When my arthritis made it hard to steer my tricycle, he rebuilt the handlebars so I could keep riding. Never asked for a dime." Voices multiplied, each testimony weaving a tapestry of kindness. The crowd shifted from celebration to something deeper, a recognition of what they had nearly lost. President Grant allowed the stories to wash over the gathering, then lifted his hand once more. "What you've described here is not just service, it's sacrifice. And I think it's time you know more about the man you've all underestimated." He gestured to an aide who stepped forward with a folder. Walter Reed served with distinction in Korea. He was awarded the Bronze Star for valor after rescuing 3 wounded comrades under fire. He never spoke of it, never sought the recognition. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Walter shifted uncomfortably, his eyes downcast. He had never mentioned the war, not even to those closest to him. The revelations continued. For decades, he's donated most of his military pension to the Children's Hospital, and he has refused multiple offers to sell his repair methods as a franchise, choosing instead to keep his service personal, here in Harlan's Mill. The weight of these truths settled over the crowd. Some wept openly, others bowed their heads in shame for the years they had overlooked him. Marcus Dean stepped forward again, his face pale, his voice unsteady. "I resign as head of town planning. I failed to see the value Mr. Reed brought to this community. I was wrong." The president nodded, accepting without ceremony. Then he reached into his jacket and withdrew a small case. "Walter Reed," he announced, his voice carrying across the churchyard. "Today, I am honored to present you with the Presidential Citizens Medal. one of our nation's highest civilian honors. It is given to those who perform exemplary deeds of service for their country or fellow citizens, and no one embodies that more than you. He placed the medal around Walter's neck. The old man's hands twitched towards it as though to refuse, his voice low. Mr. President, this isn't necessary. I just didn't want kids to have to push their bikes in the winter. The simplicity of his words struck deeper than any speech. Tears streaked down faces in the crowd. Even President Grant paused, momentarily at a loss for words, before placing a steady hand on Walter's shoulder. Then, from the edge of the gathering, a small voice piped up. A little girl, no older than 7, edged through the crowd, clutching a paper plate. On it sat a slightly lopsided cupcake. She walked up to Walter, her hands trembling. My mom says I should give you this. She says we can't pay you money for fixing my bike yesterday, but kindness should be fed with something. Walter bent slowly, his knees stiff but his heart full, and accepted the cupcake as if it were a crown. Thank you, young lady, he said with solemnity. This cupcake is still warm, just like children's hearts when they ride their bikes. The girl's face lit with joy and she darted back to her mother. The crowd, moved beyond words, broke into applause again. Not just for the medal, not just for the president's recognition, but for the essence of what Walter represented. Quiet kindness that had carried a community unseen for decades. In that moment, the man who had lived in the shadow of an abandoned church stood at the center of his town's heart. No longer overlooked, no longer underestimated. His life's work had been revealed not as a hobby, but as a legacy. By evening, the story of Walter Reed and the president had already left Harlan's Mill and spread across the nation. News programs led with headlines, the bicycle repairman and the president. Social media erupted with the hashtag #BeMoreLikeWalter, as thousands shared stories of kindness from their own communities. Yet in the quiet town where it all began, Walter himself remained unchanged. The very next morning, as he had for decades, he arrived at the churchyard at 8 o'clock sharp. But now his workbench sat beneath a newly built awning, protecting him from rain and snow. A professional sign had been hung above the oak tree, the quiet repairman since 1968. Inside the restored church, a transformation had taken place. Half of the sanctuary gleamed as a modern community center, bustling with meetings and children's activities. The other half was Walter's new workshop, equipped with state-of-the-art tools donated by manufacturers who had been moved by his story. On the walls, framed photographs told the tale of the bicycle repairman and the boy who became president, including the now famous snapshot of 9-year-old Michael Grant with his red bicycle. Despite all the change, Walter's habits never wavered. Children brought their broken bikes, and his answer was always the same. Let me see what I can do. He asked for nothing in return, accepted only smiles, and sometimes a homemade treat offered shyly by a child. Fame had not touched him. Service remained his only measure of worth. Once a month, Walter traveled to Washington, D.C., carrying his tackle box of tools. There, in a dedicated workshop at the White House, he taught staff and Secret Service agents how to repair bicycles. Those staff members then offered free repairs to children in the city's underserved neighborhoods. What began as one man's quiet act of kindness in Harlan's Mill had rippled outward, inspiring similar programs in over 50 cities across the country. Thousands of children now rode bicycles made safe and whole because one man refused to let broken wheels stay broken. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Walter adjusted the bent wheel of a boy's bike, the child watched him with wide-eyed curiosity. "Mr. Walter," the boy asked innocently, "why don't you open a big shop? You could fix more bikes and make lots of money." Walter didn't look up from his work. His hands kept moving with the same steady precision as always. "Some things don't need to be big," he said gently. "They just need to be right." The boy tilted his head, considering the answer. His mother, standing nearby, nodded with quiet appreciation. Later, she would tell her son, "Mr. Walter taught our whole town, and even the president, that value isn't measured by size or money. It's measured by heart." On the workshop wall hung 3 brass plaques. The first read, "A wheel turning again can push an entire life forward." The second, "Value isn't in the sign outside. It's in hands that never refuse to help." The third, "You might not remember his name, but if you ever had a childhood bicycle, you probably owe someone like him. Every inscription spoke not just of Walter Reed, but of the philosophy he had lived by, that even the smallest act of kindness could shift the course of a life. In the years to come, people would tell and retell the story of the bicycle repairman who changed a president's life. But to Walter, it was never about history, never about recognition. It was about the chain catching, the wheels turning, and a child's smile when they climbed back on their bike. That was enough. And so, while the nation celebrated him as a symbol of compassion, Walter Reed remained what he had always been, a quiet man beneath an oak tree, fixing bicycles, one act of kindness at a time. Life often reminds us that greatness is not always found in grand gestures, but in simple, quiet acts of service that ripple farther than we ever imagine. Walter Reed never set out to change the world. He only wanted to keep children riding. But by doing what was right without seeking reward, he showed that kindness has a power greater than wealth or authority. If this story touched you, remember to follow, like, and share your thoughts. And maybe, just maybe, honor Walter's legacy in your own way by helping someone without asking why.